Hi, welcome to the Photographic Patchings Festival workshop follow-up. I thought it was important that we captured some of the things that we actually discussed during the workshops, not so much the technical things which will be covered by the PDFs and post-processing which will indeed be covered by the screencast, but more to look at some of the things we discussed in terms of creativity and vision, and actually ways in which the photographer can actually follow their own route and define how their photography actually works and feels for them. One of the important things that we picked up at the workshop is that the technical terms and the technical skills of photography are things that can be learned very easily. We all have an ability to learn, whether we learn from videos, from books, from following other people's instructions, but given the appropriate amount of time, we're all able to learn the technical skills that photography offers us, whether it be from a film camera perspective or a multitude of different digital cameras, and all offering different technical abilities. Over time we get quite confident with the ability to control aperture, to control shutter speeds, to know how the ISO affects our image, to work with zoom, to work with composition and framing. But how do these actually work? How do these actually feed into our photographic process? How, as photographers, do we then go on to draw on our expectations, our visions, our experiences to create a photograph that is visually appealing but also conveys a mood or an image or a sense of purpose, a sense of something that tells our story? And that's the important thing about photography. As we develop as photographers, we may well work our way around the country, picking up and learning from other people, seeing images on a variety of social media, and actually going out and capturing the shots that we see other photographers doing. We'll go out and visit the honeypot locations. We'll come back with that image of Durdle Door or that image of the millstones at Stanage Edge. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's all part of the photographer's learning process. But there'll come a stage in a photographer's time, and a photographer's journey and their dynamic learning process, where we might decide that creating these honeypot scenes actually starts to feel a little bit unfulfilling and maybe doesn't tell our story. And this is where, as photographers, we might want to develop. We want to move on to the next level. And so in this discussion we're going to actually look at how we can think about what we do in terms of our photography and how we move it to the next level. Okay, so as photographers we've captured all these dynamic skills, we've captured all the technical skills. What makes up as our vision, our creativity as a photographer? It's been an interesting discussion, and many of you will have picked up with over the workshops, and we'll have actually discussed this. Thinking about our expectations of a scene, how we visualise it. This is a term that certainly anybody who's familiar with Ansel Adams' work will have looked into, and Ansel certainly looked at what he termed pre-visualisation and visualisation. Now there's been much discussion on whether pre-visualisation and visualisation are in fact the same thing, and Ansel himself actually came to the conclusion that they were. Now I'd like to offer a different perspective on this, and for me, maybe given some of the affordances of social media and all the rich information sources we have available to us now, but I think maybe that pre-visualisation and visualisation are two different things, and probably even more so now than in Ansel's time. Again, this is something that is supported and discussed by photographer Pete Bridgewood, who's actually done an excellent blog on the process and thinking about how he visualises and pre-visualises an image and the distinctions between the two. Pre-visualisation for me is an emotional expectation and a connection we make with a scene before we even head out the door. We might sit at home, we might be at the PC, we might be having a little look around the internet at sites such as Flickr and 500px. We might look at how other photographers have actually visualised this subject. Then what we might try and do is actually pour on our style and our image making techniques onto this. How would we like to create this scene that we can see? There's so many locations now where we just go online, do a basic Google search, and we'll find a myriad of images. We could go on social media, we could use Flickr, we could use Twitter, we could use Facebook, we could connect with other photographers, and again, it could be an excellent way of actually allowing us to plan and pre-visualize a scene. So from the technical perspective of knowing, using tools such as the photographer's ephemeris, tide tables, and knowing what time the sunrise is, or how high and low the tide will be at a set time when the sun rises, allowing us to understand from other photographers and tools such as Google Maps how you make the best access to a scene. What's the best location? Again, we can look at the photographer's ephemeris and understand how the light will actually fall across any given scene on the planet at any time. Absolutely fantastic tool. It's then, in terms of pre-visualization, that we'll start to pour in our own experiences, our own processing styles, our own mood, and it's an important one when creating an image. It's the mood that we actually think about creating. We'll actually have an expectation, almost kind of an emotional connection to the location before we even head out there. We'll know or have a rough idea of kind of what kind of work we might want to create. I mean, this is not always the case. We might choose and make a conscious decision from visualization or pre-visualization's perspective to actually head to a location and go with a completely blank mind. You know, it may be a location we've never been to before, and there are different approaches that allow us to look at photography in different ways. And once we pre-visualize the scene, it's then when we head out on the road on that morning, you know, we make that kind of emotional commitment to be up at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning to head to that location for sunrise and be there an hour before location. We'll be driving there, we might be doing some walking. It could be quite a solitary experience if we don't. You know, a lot of photographers work alone, some work in groups. I'm a firm believer in collaboration as a very good way of exploring your own personal boundaries. But as we walk down to a location, or if we drive to a location, again, our expectations become heightened. An hour, 2 hours, even half an hour before we get to a location, we're getting more of an understanding of what the weather's like, what the light conditions are like, how then we might want to portray the initial thoughts we had, or we might make a dynamic change to this pre-visualization. Again, once we hit the location itself, we've walked through that windy path down through the dunes, we've arrived on the beach. We'll then look around us. And a good technique I'll often say to people is, when you first make a location, pop your bags down, don't pull the camera out straight away. Head around the location, think about the things that you want to actually portray. Get a feeling for this location, understand its nuances, understand how the light is playing across the scene, understand how the wind, the other atmospheric variants are actually affecting the scene. It's then that we can start to think about photography in maybe a more dynamic way. We can think about what we want to show. We can then maybe get the camera out. Another tool I often use when I'm talking about photography is something called an artist viewfinder. It's almost like a little grey kind of window with a sliding aperture. Again, a lot of photographers will just purely use a piece of cardboard that will cut either a square or a 3x2 or a 5x4, different apertures in. The viewfinder for me allows me to kind of reflect lots of different aperture sizes and aspect ratios. But what I'll often do, but again, before even getting the camera out, is I'll walk around the scene. I'll think about how I might frame things. I'll look at the scene. One important thing for photographers to think about is how we can simplify the scene. Often we'll arrive somewhere and it can be quite a daunting experience. You know, we're often tempted to dive straight into those wide-angle lenses, capture the widest scene. You know, there's a lot vying for our attention in these images. How does it work for us? How does it work for the viewer? It's an important question that we need to start asking. For me, this is where we need to start simplifying the scene. Look at the elements that we feel are important to us. Then we can start to use our techniques of framing. And again, before I've even got the camera out, I'll be using the artist viewfinder, holding at different distances from my eye to actually frame the scene, looking around, seeing what images are there to be made, seeing how they work within the given light and the given conditions we've got that day. It's often a good way not to place too many expectations on yourself in terms of coming back with that killer image. We all go with expectations and we must get that image. It's a very rare occasion that we'll go to a scene and we'll actually make a location and we'll have visualized a certain image. It might be something we've seen on social media or on the internet. It may be something that we've constructed in our mind, but it's very rare that we'll go there for that one time or that first time and we'll actually manage to capture that in its essence in one shot or in one visit. And this, in this sense, is where return visits, getting to know a location, even working locally, working with locations close to home, so you actually understand how a location affects you, how it affects your concentration, your vision, how you're going to work with the camera, how it works with the weather. And again, projects are fantastic in this sense. We can work close to home, we can visit a scene in different light, we can approach it in many different ways. We can use our technical skills to approach an image wide, we can look at detail, we can restrict ourselves to using maybe one lens, one aperture. There are different ways of approaching a scene, and if we have a project, if we approach a scene on multiple occasions, this allows us to, for me, to develop a deeper understanding of the location, and it's a very important part of actually making that journey through a landscape, through a seascape, and understanding how it affects us and how we want to convey it to the viewer. I think it is very important to get to know locations. They can become very personal to us. I've seen some excellent books of late. There's certainly one that's just been released by Triple Kite Publishing. It's called The Pool by Ian Sargent. Again, Ian's visited a location very close to home, spent a number of years visiting this location, looking at its different nuances and capturing it. And what he's come out with is a body of work that not only stands together, but also starts to convey his understanding and his feeling for a location. The images that we see, because of this understanding, because of this feeling, are often compelling, more compelling than sometimes the standalone honeypot scenes. Images that we can come back to on multiple occasions. And that's the thing when we're putting an image out there for ourselves to look at and other viewers, is giving an image longevity. How does an image affect a person? Will we want to come back to it again? Will it have an immediate effect, emotional response? Or will it be something that grows on us, is almost kind of transient in how it affects us? We may return to an image and get different feelings each time. And that's the important thing to understand, is that different people will view an image in different ways. You can often set out to tell your story, and what you may tell is your story in your mind, but somebody else may make an emotional connection based on their experiences, their life, and actually make an association with your image in a completely different way. And that's the powerful thing of photography for me, the different way that people make different psychological associations with an image based on not the technical presentation of an image, but more the emotional presentation, the visual, the vision, what we've created. So, once we've actually arrived at a scene, and we've thought about how we've started to visualize once we get to the scene. Again, here we can see the pre-visualization that we've done before we arrive at a scene. Visualization are two very distinct concepts. Visualization for me, in this sense, is a heightened sense of kind of anticipation. We're now interacting with the landscape that's there. We're now interacting and being affected by the atmospheric variance, the landscape in itself. A good technique that I often use when I'm working, it's not one that will work for everybody and not every photographer will like it, but I quite often, if I've got a certain view, a certain vision or a certain mood that I want to create, I will quite often bring my iPod, MP3 player with me, and I'll be listening to some music. I'll be trying to think about how the music helps me settle in and understand the location. And again, for me, this is quite an important part of my working process. So, when we're actually on a location, we know all the technical skills. We've started to learn and understand our camera, and it's very easy to come up, plonk our tripod down, 24 mils, 17 mils, 10 mils, depends what we want to get, and capture the widest scene of a location. And we can provide some very compelling images in this way, as long as we think about our vision and our mood and our creative process. But there are different ways. Many photographers might kind of almost stand in the same location. We might put our tripod down, and there could be a myriad of different ways that we actually think about a location. But what you will know by looking on the internet, using social media, using image sharing sites such as Flickr and 500px, that there are those archetypal honeypot shots of a location. And maybe this is what we're not trying to avoid, but we might capture this. But then we think about how we can further this. This is where we start to break away from the constraints of compositional rules, as they're termed, or guidelines. We might move away from those kind of basic kind of rules of thirds, where you might see the kind of classic shot of a location with a rock in the foreground, a lighthouse in the midground, and some rolling hills or the sky across the sea rolling into the image. How can we actually interpret a scene in different ways? Here we can start to use other techniques. We can look at an image in terms of its motion and its movement. Here we're looking at, in some ways, the dynamism of an image. We're actually looking at a scene and thinking about not just in its kind of first and second or two-dimensional aspect, but how do we actually introduce what nature provides us? What we as humans capture and feel ourselves quite easily, and understand how do we introduce this into what is in effect a flat photograph or image that we might output. We'll start to think about the scene in different ways. Here, to create dynamic images, we might introduce movement and motion. We might slow the shutter down, use filters, and actually capture the motion of either water, trees, grass, the clouds, and even on an urban shot, to create that sense of busyness in a scene, we might capture the motion of people. Again, it's another way of thinking about capturing an image. Colour. How will we work with colour? Often when we look at a scene, we'll look at it in quite a in quite a conventional manner. We'll actually see the important elements in the scene, which are important for us to understand, that there is no doubt. But one thing and one technique we can use, and something that artists are very used to using, is something termed the colour wheel. I've placed a reference to this in the PDF, and we can actually almost simplify a scene and actually look at how it works in terms of colour. What colours work together, what colours contrast, which ones are harmonious, which ones are analogous. How can we break the scene down in terms of colour? We might look at a landscape, and everybody's seen the kind of summer shots taken in sort of May and June as the rapeseed's in its full yellow, and we've got a lovely blue sky, and we get a lovely contrast there. But what we might also is we break a landscape scene down into its very harmonious colours. So we look at kind of an area on the colour palette that works very closely. So we'll look at how the browns and the greens and the tones work together. We'll simplify a scene in this sense. So if we step back and actually look at a scene given to us in front of us, yes, we'll see the important elements within the scene, but then we can start to look at colour. How does the colour sit in the scene? What shapes, what flow, what motion does it create in the scene? This is another way of capturing an image and breaking it down in different ways. Here we touched on shape and form as well, and these are two very important compositional techniques that we might look at to break the image away from just its elements. It's one that works very well in monochrome photography, where the image does become much more reliant, not on the colours, but on the shape and the form that we actually see. So in this sense, we'll look for patterns, we'll look for shapes, we'll look for flow into the image and out of the image. We'll look to keep the viewer's eye using shapes that nature provides us in the scene. Different ways of approaching the same image. And again, what we might think of doing is actually breaking the image down, moving away from that large-scale landscape that we love to capture, but break it down into the micro landscape. Almost bring the kind of skills of kind of macro photography and bring it out into the wider landscape. What can we do? What can we see? Look at the detail within this landscape. And again, here we can start to tell a story, a set of images which tell a story about a location, about our feeling, about how we actually connect with this landscape. And for me, this is very important. And again, another interesting way to actually approach a scene is certainly something we touched on when we thought about projects, is actually think about not always kind of being deterred by bad weather. Often we'll look on the internet, we'll look at Google, we'll look at Flickr, we'll look at 500px, and we see those archetypal images, we'll see those lovely images that we all love to see and get that kind of instant wow and gratification moment. That, a sunrise, a sunset, beautiful light, transient light across the scene. What other ways do we have of actually looking at a scene? If we head out in those dull light moments, in rain, in thunder, we often get moments of breaking light in between these that actually convey, again, different feelings and different moods. It could be just as dramatic as those kind of, what we could term the golden hours at the beginning and the end of the day. A lot of people say never shoot or try not to shoot at the harsh periods of the day, that kind of through lunchtime, early afternoon, when the sun's higher up in the sky. Again, here we can use this to our benefit. We can create contrast. The harsh light creates deep shadows, prominent shadows. But what it also allows us to do is to actually work very well with the shapes and forms within the scene. These dark shadows, these deep, striking, bold shadows will create very interesting form elements within the scene. And this is something we can use to our benefit. So don't be deterred. Don't think that just because you're not the kind of person who likes to get up early in the morning, you might not be the kind of person that likes to get up late at night, or constrained by the kind of job we have or the time we have to give to photography. Actually try and make the most of the time that you have got. Get out there with the camera whenever you can. Work a scene, work a project, revisit things. Don't be deterred from people saying that you don't shoot at this time of day, or the best images to be had at that time of day, don't shoot in this light. These rules for me are there to be broken. Expectations. If we get out there in light that others may not go out in weather conditions that others may not like, this is when we can start to create compelling images that which maybe convey a sense of ourselves, a sense of our interaction, our connection with the landscape, whether it be a rural landscape or an urban landscape. And this for me is important, to embrace the photography, to not feel that we're struggling to fit it in, but to actually make the most of the time we do have with the camera. Everybody's familiar with the old concept of the 10,000 hour rule in terms of learning and putting into play your technical skills. But again, this works for our kind of compositional and our vision and our understanding of the scene. The more we get out there, the more we make images, the better we start to understand not only the landscape, but ourselves and our interaction with the landscape and our photography in general. So, to conclude, I think it's important to say that although we will all like to go out and we'll capture the honeypot images, we'll capture some beautiful scenes, capture sunset, sunrise, sunset, golden hours of the day. But let's think about how, and this is where once we've reached a certain level in terms of our technical ability, and we feel that we want that little bit more in our photography. Let's think about how we can push ourselves. And again, for me, this is where we can understand how our personal experiences affect our image making. If I look back, kind of being a child of the Midlands, living in sort of South Yorkshire as I do now, being born in Nottinghamshire, and think back up to my childhood in visiting my grandparents and kind of heading down across sort of the Bulwell side of Nottingham. Remember the journey down past the old coal mine at Babington. And for me, it always seemed quite a dark, dusty environment with the kind of orange sodium lights that would be on the coal mine site. Very industrial, very dark. And again, this might be something that now, as I kind of reflect back, and this reflection is very important, reflect back on my journey with any creative process, whether it be photography or art, as actually these kind of experiences actually start to feed into my vision, into what I create. And this might be a reason why I favour monochrome photography in some instances. I like to create very dark, moody images. Again, I've always, through time at university, I've lived in cities. And again, I find cities and the shapes and the forms and the human interaction really interesting. And again, this is something I will often try to convey through my photography. And again, combining this with that kind of dark, industrial kind of mindset that I might have had, I can start to create, for me, quite a compelling set of images. And this is where, certainly for about the last 5 years, I've been working on what I've termed my dark project, or Dark Visions, as the exhibition will be at Patchings Art Centre near Nottingham on the 27th of September 2014 for a month. This kind of series I've been working on for a year, and the year before that, and going back 5 years, I'm actually, again, what I'm thinking about is pulling my experiences and portraying them, sharing them with the viewer. And again, this is something that we can certainly all start to do. Understand how our photography is part of our overall creative journey. I think it's important to understand that as any creative person, that I don't think this journey ever ends. I think it's a constantly evolving and dynamic process. We might put a lot of expectations on ourselves to create an absolutely spot-on image every time we go out. I think we need to lose these shackles sometimes. Not put these expectations on ourselves. Not look when we do reflect, but not criticise our past images. They were all part of our learning journey and our photographic journey. So they're as valid as images we may make next year. It was where we were at the time when we took their images. We may be able to go back and reprocess them now with different technical understanding of some tools like Photoshop and Lightroom and plugins such as the Nick Google plugins. But again, does this make it the original image any less valid? And I think that's one important thing to say, is that our creativity and our vision as photographers is very personal. It will evolve and develop over time, and at no points in this journey are any of these points, if we pulled them out and reflect back at them, none of these points are any less valid. And I think that's one thing we should take from our photography, is that it's part of an evolutionary process. And if we think about how we can start to pour our emotion and our experiences and our creativity into an image, into a scene, into a set of images or project, we'll feel that developing then moves us on to the next step. We'll feel that we're starting to get more of an attachment to an image. And for me, this is very, very important. Our photography becomes much more personal, and we develop this deep connection with it. And again, as long as the images, we're making them for us, the first primary person that we should always make images for is ourselves. It's important we only make images initially to please ourselves. You might have constraints of a commercial project where you've got to shoot to a certain set of guidelines, and these are good. But in our personal photography, primarily we are making images to please ourselves, And at the end of the day, if we get that connection with this image making and start to pour our emotion into it, given the technical skills that we've developed over time, and as we understand our photography better, the images will feel stronger and more dynamic to ourselves personally. Other people will start to see this. If your photography is good, if you're pouring this emotion into it, if you're making this connection with your photography, with the landscape, with urban landscapes, equally applicable to portraits, again, in defining your own style. Once we start making this connection, once we start embedding that kind of deep enjoyment, that deep connection to our photography, other people will start to see this, and it tells our visual story. And that really is where we've been trying to understand and get to as part of this workshop at Patchings Festival this year, the creative camera. Yes, it's not about the technical skills in this sense. We can learn these, we can develop these over time. Cameras get better, sensors get better, lenses get better. How we harness this and use it as tools in shaping our vision, how we bring in software, how we use that to shape our vision. This is all part of our creative journey and our connection to photography, again, which will make us feel stronger in our development and our understanding of our personal photography. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this. Certainly if you have any more comments or questions with relation to the workshops at Patchings Arts Festival, drop us an email or give us a ring. You can visit the website www.rkphotographic.com. Email us at learning@rkphotographic.com. We're here on Twitter as well. It's one I love to kind of interact and have discussions online in a quite dynamic process. So we are at RK, capital R and capital K, Photographic. Again, if you've got any questions, want to discuss this further, don't hesitate to get in touch. And for now, enjoy your photography and may the light be with you.